Sam Bennett's been a topic of conversation for a possible trade at the trade deadline, and the NHL will be announcing every team's quarter century first and second team. So we give our predictions here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, December 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Rewards. Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL. So, Florida Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers, and a little bit of a jam-packed show today as we will be discussing some of the discussion around Sam Bennett, along with the quarter century teams that will be announced coming in 2025. And of course, the Panthers, it's a game day. The Panthers will end their road trip tonight in Minnesota against the Minnesota Wild. But here to do that all with me on today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, it is a Wednesday, which means it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, which means Jacob Winans is back. So Jacob, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely, man. So it's funny because this wasn't a conversation. This wasn't something that I didn't think I was going to touch on when Nick Kyprios of Real Kipper and Born spoke about put out something of a possible trade that the Panthers could do for Sam Bennett. And the topic of conversation and the reason behind that is expiring contract. The question of whether he's going to resign or not. And for the Panthers, this was a topic of conversation that we had last year when the Panthers were in the situation with Sam Reinhart, even the same thing with Brandon Montour, all that. But Nick Kyprios spoke about the possibility of teams like a Colorado or the Dallas Stars. With the Dallas Stars and the injury to Tyler Seguin, they have a lot of cap space now to make possible moves at the trade deadline this year. Colorado, a little bit of a harder situation with their cap. They still got to figure out whether Gabriel Landeskog is going to be part of the mix this year for them. They probably have their own deadline. But then there was another article that went out there that was out there on Eric Francis talking about a Calgary reunion possibly for Sam Bennett, and talking about plenty of friends there that he's played with, including Jonathan Huberdeau, $19 million in cap space. But the conversation, we were wondering this time last year when Sam Reinhart was on his goal pace for the Panthers of pricing him out in Florida, and then we saw that the cap was going to be a lot higher than it actually was. We still don't know what the actual cap is going to be for the Panthers and the NHL. We know that at a minimum it's going to be 92.5, could be higher. But regardless of all that, Jacob, I think of this situation for the Panthers and just what Sam Bennett brings for identity. I'm in the camp of I rather let this season play out. And even if the Panthers lose Sam Bennett and having him walk in free agency, you're still trying to repeat as Stanley Cup champions. You win down the middle, and if you have that combination of Barkov, Bennett, and then Lundell in your top 9, I don't see a reason why the Panthers would make this move to trade Sam Bennett at the deadline this year.
Absolutely, I agree. The Panthers are very clearly contenders again, and there's no reason to break up a contending team by creating a hole in the middle of your defense. Now, I understand there's the argument to be made that Lundell can play second line center, and you can trade Sam Bennett to bring back a package that maybe gets you a right-handed defenseman or a young D-man with potential. But the situation the Panthers are in right now, it's not they're not a team looking for potential. They're a team that's in win now mode. So I understand the argument that Bennett probably brings you back a huge haul. He's a guy that a lot of teams want, but the teams that you'd be considering trading him to are also contenders. So whatever draft picks are coming back are going to be late round draft picks more than likely. You don't necessarily value those too highly if you're the Panthers, because late round draft picks are developmental pieces, and late round draft picks don't usually make it to the NHL within their first or second year post draft. So that's the Panthers Cup window. It's immediate. You don't want to make trades for giving up quality players that are helping you win right now to get possible players for the future. The future is now for Florida. So I don't see the sense in trading him for futures. If you make a hockey trade and try to bring in a win now defenseman, maybe there's an argument to be made there, but you would assume that whatever defenseman comes back is also going to take up a chunk of the cap. And it's almost a lateral move in some respects. I think the Panthers seem to be relatively happy with their decor right now, and I think any changes made there are going to be deadline additions, and I don't think you need to make addition by subtraction in this situation. So the Panthers' biggest strength has been their center depth. That's really what won them the Cup last year, and that's what got them to the Stanley Cup the year before. I don't see a reason for the Panthers to upset that, and it's definitely not a situation where Bennett re-signing is completely out of the picture either.
Absolutely,
there's still time to make a deal happen, and then even if it gets all the way to free agency, before free agency opens, the Panthers still have their window of negotiation before the rest of the league does. You could still get a deal done in that time frame, same way they did with Sam Reinhart. And it also helps that the guys who they have re-signed, Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart, their AAVs are not crazy through the roof, and Sam Bennett would have a hard time coming to the table and asking for more than either one of those guys. So it's not a situation where they're in a spot of poor leverage when it comes to his salary on the next potential deal. So I don't see a reason to trade him. And even if you lose him for nothing, you at least gave it your best shot contending, and you got a Stanley Cup out of it.
Exactly. And one of the discussions that Kyprios pointed out is that their number is as wide of a football field as far away of being agreed to, and where we are in the calendar in December, I just shrug my shoulders when I hear that. I'm like, yeah, it's December. Why? I would believe that it would be as far of a football field as a football field when it comes to what it's agreed upon. I never expected a deal to be agreed on right around this area. I mean, although we we didn't expect opening night for Carter Verhaeghe to agree to an extension right before then. I know he's Sam Bennett's been extension eligible since July 1 of this year. But I think that the attention is more on the Panthers, especially because they just went to Western Canada. So they, of course, the Stanley Cup final rematch that happened a few days ago for them against Edmonton. So that attention is being more on the Panthers as they're visiting those cities that have a bigger TV market for hockey fans there. So I think for this, I think it's a conversation worth having. But I just think of what you have in it in this team versus if you were to trade for a D and getting that time to fit in, because although I do have my complaints about when the NHL trade deadline is, not that 20 some odd games isn't enough, in my opinion, to get going for someone. And I get that there have been trades that have been made before and that there have been some that have started already. But I just think when you know what you have versus what you don't, when you trade back for a defense out of it, I just think it's an easy answer to just keep them.
Definitely, and the status that the Panthers are in right now plays such a huge part in this. I think I would probably change my tune if it were a situation where the Panthers were a middle of the pack group or a team that was starting a downward trend and maybe wasn't going to be contending. But by all accounts, it looks like the Panthers are going to continue contending for the next few years at least. You don't strip yourself of a year where you can contend and possibly win a Stanley Cup. you don't take that away from yourself by trading a core piece who plays such a huge part in what the Panthers do. And that's not an indictment on Anton Lundell at all, saying that he's not ready for that second line job. He very clearly is. When Barkov was out, he played incredibly well. Last year in the playoffs when Sam Bennett was out, Anton Lundell
Even on
played
Monday.
incredibly well. Exactly. He's played his best hockey when he has to step up into a bigger role. But when the Panthers can give themselves that kind of advantage to have three centers who are legitimate top six centers, you've got Barkov, who's one of the best, probably 5 best players in the world. Then you've got 2 centers who are legit quality second line centers. That's an advantage you don't want to just give away by making a trade. That's the strength of the Panthers. They're best up the middle. I don't see any. You can't convince me of any reason to get rid of your biggest advantage over your opposition in the Eastern Conference. It makes no sense. It almost doesn't matter what the return is because you've got such a huge advantage in that area. Keep it together as long as you possibly can, even if it is just for the rest of this year.
Absolutely, I'm in full agreement there with you there. But that's our stance on some of the things out there about Sam Bennett, and you guys can come back to this conversation later on if those come up again. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss the NHL close to releasing their quarter century first and second teams for every franchise. We're going to make our predictions on what the Panthers quarter century teams will possibly look like. We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by SelectQuote. And the World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork. And teamwork also protects your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote is a licensed insurance agents that are perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. You invest so much time to take care of yourself to be the healthiest, best version of you. If you are in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage up to $5 million. No medical exam required. Head to selectquote.com and the licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. Also, today's episode is brought to you by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable points on rent and everyday spending. No extra cost. Redeem points towards flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments with over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program. The possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. And start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL. Make sure you use our link so that they know we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning points today. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, December 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Here with Jacob Winans once again here on another edition of Winans Wednesday. And Jacob, 2025 is slowly approaching. We are less than 15 days away from 2025. So the NHL announced that they are going to be announcing quarter century teams for each and every team, and they're going to be doing one day at a time. And the Panthers are towards the beginning of the announcements. Theirs will be announced on January 3rd of this year. So we get to have maybe a little bit of fun here on the show to discuss who we think our quarter century teams are, first and second teams. So it's going to be a full line of forwards, one line of two lines of defense and 2 goaltenders. So two forwards, 2 2 goaltenders. So I'm gonna list both of my teams, and I'm gonna have you list both of yours, and then we're gonna have a little bit of discussion here. So my top team for the Panthers here is Jonathan Huberdeau, Alexander Barkov, and Olli Jokinen, Jay Bouwmeester, Aaron Ekblad on defense, and then Roberto Luongo as the first team. Second team is Matthew Tkachuk, Stephen Weiss, Sam Reinhart, and then defense for the second team, Gustav Forsling, Dmitry Kulikov, and Thomas Vokoun. That is my second team for the Panthers. So I want to give you the floor for your team, and then we'll have a discussion on maybe our disagreements or what we agree on.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with a couple of honorable mentions that just barely missed the cut for me. I've got Vinny Trocheck. I've got Pavel Bure. I've got Jaromir Jagr, and I've got Carter Verhaeghe as my honorable mention forwards. And then on D, my honorable mentions are Brian Campbell, Jay Bouwmeester, and Mackenzie Weegar. So my top team, I've got the Panthers' big 3 forwards. I've got Matthew Tkachuk, Sasha Barkov, and Sam Reinhart. And on D, I've got Forsling, and I've got Ekblad. And in goal for my top team, I've got Bobrovsky.
Okay.
And then my second team, I've got Stephen Weiss, I've got Olli Jokinen, and I've got Jonathan Huberdeau. And then on D, I've got Dmitry Kulikov and Brandon Montour. And then in goal, I have Luongo. So that's my first and second team.
Okay, so your first team is based mostly on today's Florida Panthers, mostly. So I see where you're going with that. So I wanted to have a little bit of a mix. My way of thinking was regular season games that they played with the Panthers. I took longevity into the equation, which is why I took out I did not have Pavel Bure on this, because if you're thinking quarter century, very short time after that, right before Pavel Bure was traded to the New York Rangers, so he was automatically out for me. So I just think of for like someone like why I had someone like Jay Bouwmeester on my top team for the Panthers is logged big minutes, 24 minutes a game on some bad teams, higher than Forsling and Ekblad. So it really goes to show how much he was relied on, even in those down years for the Panthers, where they were going on their playoff drought. Obviously, the relationship between Bouwmeester and the franchise did not end well for them. So that's another thing. Jonathan Huberdeau, 10 seasons, 3rd most games, 2nd most points there. Olli Jokinen's 6th most games played, 3rd most points. I had to have Luongo on my top team for the Panthers. They're 11 years with Florida at the right, and his career started at the very turn of the century. Although he's left for a little bit to Vancouver and got more of the recognition there, I just think with his longevity there, and I wanted to put Kulikov because leaving, coming back, and then winning a Stanley Cup, I think, and then having the sweep out of the crease that created the Stanley Cup winning goal, very, very valuable for the Panthers there. And Matthew Tkachuk, what he's done in a short time for the Panthers, and really done it in both the regular season and the postseason. So there's a theme here for me. That's why I have Thomas Vokoun over Sergei Bobrovsky, because we've seen the postseason success for Bobrovsky. Obviously, the regular season for Bob, we can't judge too much based on what we've seen. We know that he's going to turn it on, and I know Stanley Cups do matter, but I just also want to give Thomas Vokoun his flowers. I mean, he lost 29 games while posting a .919 save percentage in 2008, and then posted a .923 in a year that the Panthers lost in a tiebreaker to make the playoffs in 2009 with Montreal and Pete DeBoer's first year as head coach. So I think I think for the Panthers, it's something to recognize on those years that Vokoun was with the Panthers for those 4 years right after they made the trade for him. So I think that's valuable, and I think he deserved at least one postseason appearance with Florida there. So that's why I have Vokoun there. So your mindset behind putting your teams together.
Yeah. So first, I do want to definitely say that Vokoun, that I love the inclusion of Vokoun on yours. He's really an honorable mention for me. Just given that he's got 2 Hall of Famers ahead of him in Panthers history in goal, but he was an absolutely incredible goaltender when he was with Florida. And The Panthers, if they had gotten a little bit better production offensively in front of him those years, they really could have been one of those like playoff underdogs who went on a deep run based on goaltending, because the tandems they had with Vaughn were really, really good. They had Vaughn and Craig Anderson for a period of time, and that's some really good goaltending. So Thomas Vaughn was awesome. For me, my sort of justification and how I made it, I went more than just statistical impact. I went beyond the stats and more franchise impact. And I don't think anything really has more of an impact on the franchise than your name being on the Stanley Cup for the Panthers for the first time in franchise history. So in that way, it was a little bit weighted. The guys who are currently on the team or were part of the Stanley Cup champion winning roster, it adds a little bit of weight in my rankings, which is why I have Tkachuk ahead of Huberdeau. Now the argument to be made there with Huberdeau, I guess in a way, his impact and his weight also sort of leans toward the Stanley Cup, because if Huberdeau wasn't so good here, then he doesn't get you Tkachuk. So there's another way of looking at it there, but and he ranks very highly with points, assists, goals, everything. There's nothing that Huberdeau didn't do here except win a Stanley Cup. So I can't knock his play at all. I just put Tkachuk ahead of him because Tkachuk really kind of carried the Panthers into the new era of contending and winning a Stanley Cup. So Tkachuk gets my first spot. Barkov obviously is self-explanatory. He's the best player in the history of the franchise. And Sam Reinhart, not just this season and last season, but even before that, he was since his first day in Florida, he's been so consistent. He's never scored under 30 goals in a season for the Panthers. Scores the goal that wins them the Stanley Cup. Can't get better impact than that. And then defense, Ekblad's the best defenseman to ever play for this franchise. I don't think that's really up for debate. And Kulikov, I think, is underrated. The Panthers' all-time leader in hits. One of the best shutdown D the Panthers have had. Gus Forsling, a waiver claim, who goes on to become the Panthers' number one D. I think that's huge. What we're really had a hard time with was the final defense spot, picking between Brian Campbell and Brandon Montour.
Yeah.
That was a tough one for me because Montour had the stats. He's got the Stanley Cup, which is why I gave him the edge there. Brian Campbell, I feel like, is so underrated. His time with the Panthers, he really, really was a Norris Trophy caliber defenseman. Didn't always have the offensive output, but if you watch Brian Campbell play during his prime and during his time with the Panthers, you cannot overstate his value. He was so huge on some Panthers teams that were really middle of the pack. And then when they finally won the Atlantic Division, got to the playoffs, he was huge on that team also. And Brian Campbell was just such a fun player to watch. So he just missed my second team, and I put Montour instead. But I don't want to leave this conversation without highlighting Brian Campbell, one of the most underrated defensemen to ever play for the Panthers.
Yeah, and then, after winning the Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks, it was a Dale Talon type of signing for them. I mean, the familiarity there, but then being part of that team that won the Southeast Division in 2012 for the Panthers, Lady Byng award winner as well. So let's not forget that for Brian Campbell, for him, and just during his time with the Florida Panthers, and just how he was able to just for his average time on ice for the Panthers, he was at 25 minutes. So he was also a big part of the Panthers there for how much he was maybe in that window for the Panthers that was just trying to get out of the state of mediocrity for them. And go ahead.
And sorry to cut in there. In the same way that we give Jaromir Jagr so much credit for helping to develop Barkov into the player he is, and helping to develop Huberdeau, and really kind of instilling that work ethic in the Panthers' young core, Brian Campbell was all of that for Aaron Ekblad.
Absolutely.
When they were paired up, Ekblad comes into the league as an 18-year-old and a number one pick. He gets paired up with Brian Campbell, and he wins Rookie of the Year, and his career really kind of takes off early because he has Brian Campbell to lean on, and they were such a great pair. to start. So if we credit Yager for the development of Barkov, Huberdeau, and to an extent, he had an impact on Matthew Tkachuk in Calgary. You definitely have to give Brian Campbell his flowers for turning Ekblad into the defenseman he is.
Absolutely. Much respect for Soup there for him and how he's helped a youngster like Aaron Ekblad at the time to get to the player that he is today. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Minnesota Wild tonight at 9:30 on TNT. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. And if you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any other sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks, plus this holiday season, giving away $30 million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. When your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week on Prize Picks, I'm eyeing the hockey board, looking at Jack Hughes for more than 4 shots on goal, Artemi Panarin more than 1 assist. It's so simple to make the picks and have fun with friends while potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly, and you can do that all on Prize Picks. Run your game. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, December 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Here for another edition of Winans Wednesday is Jacob Winans himself. And Panthers Wild, 9:30 on TNT and Max. So the Minnesota Wild come in 7-3-0 in their last 10 and battling for that top spot in the Central after Winnipeg has come back down to earth a little bit. But they're dealing with a few injuries on their team. Philip Gustafson is day-to-day. Jacob Middleton is on IR. So their top pair of Middleton and Brock Faber has been placed by Jonas Brodin up there, and then a little bit of a hole at their second line center. But I mean, Gustafson has owned the Panthers in his career, 3-2-1 with a .928 save percentage, including that opening night loss for the Panthers last year. And the Panthers, right before losing last year in Minnesota, they were on a 3-game winning streak in XL Energy Center. And last 2 matchups combined for a total of 5 goals. Not the recent matchup, but the matchup before, Sergei Bobrovsky was outstanding as the Panthers got a shootout win. I remember Nick Fairbanks was actually there at that game for that one back in February, I believe, of 2023. But we talk about Leon Draisaitl leading the league in goals, Nathan McKinnon doing Nathan McKinnon things, Sam Reinhart and his 2-way play. But if you're thinking about MVP, if you were to take out that player and place someone else, based on Kirill Kaprizov, 18 points better than the next best player on the Minnesota Wild, I think he's the Hart Trophy winner this year. And what Minnesota is doing with all the dead cap space that's going to come off their books this summer, able to build their farm system. They take a little bit of a flyer on David Juracek making the trade with the Columbus Blue Jackets. And then they have guys coming up in the ranks of Z Boyum, who was Jack Devine's teammate in the University of Denver for him. But, I mean, this is gonna be a tough matchup. The Panthers do possibly have the health advantage. Assume we still don't know the status of Alexander Barkov if he's going to play. We might see one of Jesper Wallstedt or Marc-Andre Fleury. So this is going to be an interesting matchup. I don't know how this is definitely going to go down.
Yeah, I mean, Kaprizov is obviously the game breaker, and in a game like this, his speed, his creativity, his the offensive ability for him, it makes this a tough matchup any way you slice it, and especially if you let them get on the power play. He's so creative and so good with when he has time and space. You can't let them get on the power play. And we've seen the Wild really take the Panthers apart on the power play in the past couple of seasons. I think last year, the Wild's visit to South Florida, 4 for 6 on the power play, just ran the Panthers out of the building. And then this year in the Wild's visit to South Florida, Bobrovsky gets chased. I believe that game ended up 5-1. Bob gets pulled after the second period after giving up a bunch of goals. They kind of took him apart, and it wasn't necessarily just Bob having a bad game. It was the Wild were really hungry on the forecheck, and then their transition game was ridiculous, which has really been a strength for them this year is getting out in transition, and they pass it so well once they have like an odd man rush, whether it's a 3-on-2, a 2-on-1. Even when they get some of those 4-on-3 where you have a D-man jumping up and then you've got only one defenseman back, they've really been able to handle those pretty well. They're not afraid to take a risk like that because they've got guys like Jonas Brodin, incredibly underrated defensive defenseman, one of the best in the league. Reminds me so much of Gus Forsling. And then Brock Faber is fantastic. He can QB the power play, and he can also get back defensively in transition. Reminds me a lot of Charlie McAvoy in that way. They're very solid. They are very solid, and offensively they can put some goals on you, which has historically been the knock on the Wild, but not really anymore. This is a team that can score with the best of them. So it's going to be a game where you got to stay out of the box, and you're going to have to out forecheck them because their forecheck is really good. It's really good, and they've got some good defensive forwards in their bottom six that can make life difficult for you. So you definitely got to forecheck hard. Beyond that, it should just be a good game between two playoff contenders, two teams that have Stanley Cup aspirations this year. And the Panthers probably don't have a great taste in their mouth from losing the game at home earlier this year in really ugly fashion. But also worth noting that game, yes, it was also Gustafsson and net, but also the Panthers were dealing with a lot of injuries. It was Matthew Tkachuk's first game back from what was believed to be appendicitis, and Barkov was still out. And it was around that time when they had Patrick Giles in the lineup, had Belinsky playing some forward. It wasn't exactly the full strength Panthers. So we'll see how different it looks tonight. Should be a good game. Anytime the Panthers get a chance to play against playoff caliber teams, some postseason contenders, that's good. That's good for the team. That's good for to kind of see what's required of them. It's a little bit of a measuring stick. And hopefully they can end the road trip on a positive note and get over 500 for the trip.
Yeah, Brock Faber and Jonas Brodin, like you mentioned, those two guys are part of the Four Nations for their respective countries for them. And crazy to think the Wild are second in goals against, but 30th on the penalty kill. So that's going to be a big part of the game that we hope that the Panthers could take advantage of. They got no power play attempts at all in their last matchup, and the Wild played a clean game last go around for them, and they took advantage of the Panthers on at least getting one power play goal. So it's really going to be important for the Panthers to at least get on the man advantage on a night like tonight when the Wild are shorthanded as they are. So that's going to really be the key for me. And hey, if you can beat them at 5-on-5 with Jesper Wallstedt, he hasn't gotten up to the best start of his career. He's still a very young goaltender for him, and this is the last hurrah for Marc-Andre Fleury. By the way, did you see that? Did you see that that shot attempt by Travis Konechny on Marc-Andre Fleury on top of the crease, and then Michkov takes away his goal? Did you see that? I
did see that. Michkov had to stick down on the ice in the far post and just completely blocked his own teammate. That was rookie mistake right there.
I wonder what kind of jokes Marc-Andre Fleury said to Michkov after that.
Because Fleury's known to thank his post. So in a situation like that, does he go and say thank you to Michkov's stick? I don't know.
So I had a good laugh at that when I saw that. So definitely gonna be a fun game in front of a national audience. Once again, the Panthers are gonna, as the Stanley Cup champions, they are in front of more eyeballs, which why again that first segment that we had is they get more attention based on possible trades and everything in for them. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8. And real quick before we sign off, as we preview that Wild game, I just want to shout out Matt Zuccarello on the Wild. #HockeyTough. I don't know if you were caught up to speed with what his injury was recently that he's coming back from. but took a nasty Brock Faber slap shot below the belt and had to undergo emergency surgery.
Yes.
That's tough. I can't even imagine that. So glad to see Matt Zuccarello back in uniform and back on the ice for the Wild here. And that guy's hockey tough. I don't want to think about that. So good luck to Zuccarello and his comeback.
Yeah, Matt Zuccarello, hockey tough. Jake Middleton with an awesome quote a few weeks ago, which is not safe for work. Look it up yourself if you want.
Yep.
So a lot of good headlines coming out of Minnesota this year for them. But Jacob, thank you so much, and I will see you not next week, but the week after, as Winans Wednesday next week falls on Christmas. So see you in 2 weeks, my friend.
Looking forward to it. Merry Christmas ahead of time, and Merry Christmas to Florida Panthers fans out there. Enjoy the holidays with your families.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.